Greetings and welcome to TMH English News with me, Deleitna Dawalko. Moving on to our headlines, Ethiopian government has allowed humanitarian flights to enter the regions of Lalibela and Kambolcha while still denying access to Tigray. New research exposes flawed report of the joint investigations into the human rights violations in the Tigray region, and Ireland's foreign minister warns of the possible breakup of the war-torn Ethiopia. Ethiopian government allows humanitarian flights to enter Lalibela and Kambolcha while denying flights into Tigray. This was disclosed by Ethiopia's Deputy Prime Minister during the discussion yesterday with the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman. During their discussions, Demeka disclosed that the humanitarian flights to Lalibela and Kambolcha are allowed, and in addition, 369 aid trucks are permitted to enter the Tigray region, as tweeted by the Ethiopian government communication services. The top U.S. diplomat met Ethiopia's Deputy Prime Minister, who also doubles as the foreign minister, in a bid to revive and stop talks about the ceasefire. Jeffrey Feltman and Olusegun Obasanjo, now the African Union's High Representative for the Horn of Africa, both arrived in Ethiopia on Thursday, as the Foreign Ministry said. Both have said they want the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan forces and their allies to declare an unconditional ceasefire and allow access for humanitarian aid to areas in the northern Ethiopia affected by this war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken left Kenya on Thursday after discussing Ethiopia with President Uhuru Kenyatta. A lot of what was discussed yesterday was how we marry the different efforts from the U.S. and the AU and the other mediators, a Senate senior State Department official told reporters on the plane. The Tigrayan forces and the Oromo Liberation Army are marching on the capital of Addis Ababa, but more intense fighting has been disclosed and reported in the Tigrayan forces push east, a bid to capture the route linking landlocked Ethiopia to the region's main port of Djibouti. Leaders of the Tigray Armed Forces want Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to go down and step down and the government to permit humanitarian aid into Tigray. The government says Tigrayan forces must withdraw from territories that they have captured in the neighboring regions. A professor of geography and research at Belgium's Ghent University exposes the flawed report of the joint investigations of the atrocities that were committed in the Tigrayan region. Timnit Bayru has more.
A new research exposes the flawed report of the joint investigation into the human rights violations in Tigray. The findings of the research is published in a news version of Atlas of the Humanitarian Situation in Tigray that documents 260 reported massacres in Tigray, covering the period from September 2020 to September 2021. One of the researchers, Jan Nyssen, professor of geography and researcher at Belgium's Ghent University, told Magala Foresight that joint investigations suffer from impartiality and deliberately glosses over the truth with both sidism.
It is easy to accuse both sides if you start a report with the idea this report must be balanced. And we are going to find some war crimes by each of us. Yeah? They have started from that idea. Such a report should start from the idea this report should be truth. And not it should be balanced, and we are going to find some war crimes by what we found, and I'm a bit zooming on my numbers. In 45% of the cases, and I'm taking about the fully documented civilian casualties, 45% has been killed by Eritrean soldiers, 20% has been killed by Ethiopian soldiers, 17% either Ethiopian or Eritrean, because they were there together, and when the people came back, they found it dead, so they cannot know who did it. 4% by Amhara. And then we have 12.5% that are not provided. And very often that is related to Western Tigray because it has always been so difficult to get information out of there. And then a small 1% by Tigray forces. You know, another bad thing that they were doing was almost hoping that the hyenas were coming. Yeah, very often they, for example, in Mehabradego, for months, they prevented the people, the young boys who were shot on the edge of the cliff. For months, they prevented people from collecting the remains. hoping that hyena eats everything, and there is no more evidence, huh?
Professor Nason said, though the atrocities the perpetrators were sending a message not only to the current generation of Tigrayans, but also for posterity.
Giving mainly the message, they are even not afraid of killing the priests. They are even not afraid of killing in Aksum, so we should surrender. That's a bit the way of handling all realities and saying Tigray never rise again. We are hammering you and you will be down for hundreds of years. And mothers will be talking to their children about all the horror of 2020 to make them very afraid. Don't race again against centralism of Ethiopia or something. Yeah, we can tell so many bad stories of what has happened. I must say that I see Tigray be going to many places that we mentioned in our atlas and taking witnesses where people tell very awful stories of, so making people lie on the ground and then take a big stone and dump it on the head of the person. You don't understand how people can do such things.
The Atlas, which is the result of rigorous research by scholars of Belgium's Ghent University, Department of Geography, documents and maps the situation in which approximately 6 million Tigrayans find themselves.
Executive Committee of the World Oromo Congress calls for the restructuring of the Ethiopian state. Executive Congress of the World Oromo Congress has issued a roadmap to kick off a conversation that would lead to a consensus about the country's future. According to Eskail Gabisa, he has said this to be the main objective of the nations and the nationalities in Ethiopia, and that they should exercise this right. Executive Committee said that the Ethiopian state should be restructured so that its ability to make war against its own citizens is limited, and it also called for the system of a transitional justice and accountability of perpetrators of crimes committed in the ongoing war in Ethiopia. Abiy's government recruiting civilians to defend the Ethiopia's capital against advancing Tigrayan forces. According to African News, the civilians recruits went through 2 days of military training with the aim of equipping themselves to defend the Ethiopian capital against advancing Tigrayans. This was one of the 11 similar events taking place across the entire city. Buzena Abdul Qadir, Addis Ababa City Councilman speaker, counted on numbers to defeat the adversary.
Ethiopia will prevail. They are very small in number. We have too many people for them. We are one. We are united and we take Ethiopia forward together.
Ethiopia's war between the country's military and the fighters from the northern Tigray region is nearing the city of Addis Ababa. A group who call themselves citizen officers are on the lookout for potential members of the TPLF, and Mesfin Zerfu, a community organizer and city officer, he told Sky News that he had TPLF sympathizers and members hiding in a house that they were subsequently taken into custody.
Yes, we found sympathizers and members of the TPLF. We found them hiding in a house together. All of them were taken into custody.
The United Nations is concerned, however, and says most of those who have been locked up are ethnic Tigrayans. A prominent Tigrayan who spoke anonymously said the number could get a lot higher.
You can't use your language outside. If you use, you will be detained. You will be taken. All are considered as TPLF. Whether you have other ideas or political opinions, you will be considered TPLF.
The Tigray forces say that they're pressuring Ethiopia's government to lift month-long blockade on the Tigray region, which includes an Ethiopian government restrictions on flights over the same region. The mother of an Australian man stranded in Ethiopia's capital of Addis Ababa is pleading with the federal government to help get him out of the war-torn nation. The mother, who preferred not to be named, told ABC her 40-year-old son was swept up in the mass arrests in the capital on Saturday and is now being detained by the government forces. She said he's one of many Tigrayans being held in the detention as the nation descends into a civil war. I'm scared, totally scared. I might lose my son, she added. She urged the Australian government to help bring her son, an Australian citizen who has been living in Addis Ababa for the last 3 years, home to his Queen's land. The Australian Tigray Alliance said it confirmed with the Australian Embassy in Addis Ababa that Hana's son was currently in detention. Saron Burhana from ATA said he is one of the 20 Australian citizens in danger as violence against ethnic Tigrayans intensifies in the capital. She has called on the Australian government to step up its efforts to end this genocide. Mass arrests in Ethiopia scare Tigrayans in the neighboring countries. And amid reports of the mass arrests of Tigrayans in Ethiopia, a church source says fear has gripped those residing in the neighboring countries who fear that they could be next on the target. We have received information that those arrested are being kept in camps where the conditions are extremely bad. We have also heard that every night some disappear and are not seen again, said in an Ethiopian church source who could not be named for fear of his safety. At the same time, the source said Ethiopian authorities had made public their intentions to crack down on Tigrayans in the neighboring countries for providing what they called wrong information about the conflict. They said reports going out are using the help of Tigrayans in other countries, and the source added that I think I can't and I won't go back to Ethiopia unless things change. I have been told it's too unsafe for me. We are concerned about the deafening silence of the faith groups at the fate of arbitrary arrests and imprisonment over ethnic base. He added people believe Tigrayan civilians are being held in Ethiopia as prisoners of war, as bargaining chips, or to slowly kill them to weaken their support. Elise Throssell, spokeswoman for the UN Human Rights Commission, said many of those arrested have been informed of the reasons of their detention, nor have they been brought before a court of law. Elise Throssell, spokeswoman for the UN Human Rights Commission, said many of those arrested have not been informed of the reasons for their detention, nor have they been brought before the court of law. The United Nations says 6 UN staff members detained by the Ethiopian government have been released. UN spokesman Stephane Dujarric announced Thursday that besides the 6 staff members, all of more than 70 detained truck drivers waiting to deliver aid to war-torn Tigray region have also been freed. He said 5 of its staff members, 1 dependent, remain in custody in the capital of Addis Ababa, adding it's pressing for their release as well. Tigray has not received badly needed aid supplies, including food, medicine, and fuel, since the Ethiopian military began hitting the Tigray capital with airstrikes on the 18th of October, and Dujarric said Thursday that the aid convoys are still being blocked. Even before, just 15% of needed supply-laden trucks had entered Tigray since mid-July, as stated by the UN. On November 10th, the United Nations announced that 16 local employees had been detained in the recent days in Addis Ababa. All were ethnic Tigrayans, who witnesses say have been swept up by thousands since the recent state of emergency was declared by the Abiy Ahmed's government. Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister Simone Convey has warned of possible breakup of Ethiopia because of war on Tigray. The foreign minister told Dial it's possible that Ethiopia, with a population of 115 million people, could fracture, causing enormous instability in the Horn of Africa, not least to its closest of neighbors. The Irish foreign minister is due to visit the capital of Addis Ababa in 2 weeks, but is unsure if that will be possible in the current circumstances. The one-year war has resulted in famine and severe food insecurity for more than 6.5 million civilians in the region. Ethiopia is the single largest recipient of Irish aid, and Ireland has been very critical of the Ethiopian government's scorched earth policy on Tigray, and that it has created tension with the Ethiopian authorities. Ireland is among a number of countries where Ethiopia closed down its diplomatic operations, and Ireland has made it its business on the Security Council to raise concern and to shine a spotlight on this issue. They said, "We are very concerned about the future of Ethiopia." The government has provided approximately 4.5 million euro in humanitarian aid for refugees in Tigray, the Amhara region, and its neighboring Sudan, where many Tigrayans have fled. Convey was responding during dial questions to Sinn Féin Foreign Affairs spokesman John Brady, who's highlighted the mass arrests of Tigrayan people, including the arrests of 16 UN employees. He said these detainees are being left without food or bedding and have been subjected to mistreatment by these Ethiopian forces. Brady noted that the United States has recently imposed sanctions on neighboring Eritrea over its involvement in the conflict and asked if the European Union had any similar plans. Convey, who raised issue of the meeting of the EU Foreign Affairs Council on Monday, said that he supported the U.S. impositions of targeted sanctions on these individuals. He also added, however, that the EU does not have a collective position on that yet, but is looking at its options. Convey said Ireland secured agreement in early November at the UN Security Council in the first council statement in 6 months on the situation, calling for a cessation of hostilities, safe and unhindered humanitarian access. The Irish foreign minister stressed that it was not about taking sides, but about calling out the breaches of the international law and international humanitarian law. That concludes our news for today. Thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend.